Good morning. I want to welcome all of you here to our weekly Campolo Scholars Fellowship. It's great to see so many of the students and some other guests. And thank you for joining us. For those of you who aren't weekly involved with our group, we had a wonderful week last week with visiting Campolo fellow Reverend Dr. Victor Aloyo and at the Missions Forum. And I know he was able to speak in a number of classes. We're just grateful for the participation in our community and contribution to discussions around diversity and inclusion. But I'm going to defer to my friend and colleague, Megan Aceto, to do a proper introduction of Dr. Leo. Megan is the coordinator of student ministries and service learning and an adjunct faculty member and for the first year programs in social work. She has been a great friend and collaborator through this Campolo Fellow Lecture Series. And, as we bring in speakers to the community, she's been a great ally and advocate for creating access and opportunities for those speakers to reach a broader audience at Eastern. She's devoted to social justice and following Jesus, and I'm delighted to count you, to be a friend of yours and a colleague here at Eastern. So thanks for all your effort in arranging Victor's time with us, and please introduce our special guest this morning.
Robert, I appreciate that. Thanks for your kind words. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see a few familiar faces, to see some new faces. I'm really delighted to be with you this morning for your Campolo Scholars time together. And it is my honor and privilege to introduce the Reverend Dr. Victor Aloyo. I've known Victor for about 14 years. If you happened to be in chapel last week, you heard the story about how I came to visit Princeton Theological Seminary as a prospective student. And we got to the residence hall where my mom and I brought my mom with me, because sometimes you got to bring your mom with you to things. And there'd been some kind of miscommunication. We got to the residence hall where we were going to be, where they were graciously hosting us. There was one room with one twin bed, and didn't know what to do. And so I called security, and security called Victor, and Victor showed up 30 minutes later with an air mattress and linens. And that hospitality just really spoke to me very deeply. And I think probably the first time that I reconnected with him when I started my time at Princeton Seminary, I found him and I was like, do you remember that I was the person you brought that air mattress to? Thank you so much. It was really deeply touching to me. I'm incredibly honored and privileged to be able to call myself, now 10 years out from my graduation from Princeton Seminary, a colleague of Victor's. We've encountered each other in the Presbytery of Philadelphia. We're both PCUSA, connected to the PCUSA in different capacities, but it's a real honor and a privilege, Victor. So thanks so much for your time with us last week. Victor is as you might have seen in the email that Robert sent out, the Associate Dean for Institutional Diversity and Community Engagement at Princeton Theological Seminary. Obviously, when I was asking for his help and he brought me an air mattress, he was in the admissions office, just really serving the students well there. But he's held a variety of different positions within the seminary. He also directs the Office of Multicultural Relations. And he's also been a pastor for all these years since his graduation from seminary. So he is embedded and committed to the communities that he serves. And for that, I'm really grateful. And also so grateful for the time that he spent with us last week, the ways in which he embedded himself in the Eastern community for a few days, the engagement that he had with our students. I'm so excited then to turn it over to him and give him an opportunity to engage with all of you. So thank you so much for being here, Victor. It's good to see you again.
Megan, it's great to see you. And Robert, thank you so much for this opportunity. Megan, thank you for the introduction. I am just so honored and privileged to have had the opportunity last week to share with classes and with in chapel a little bit about the story of how God has guided me in working with peoples from all backgrounds and from varying experiences. For me, it is a wonderful call to ministry and a call that that hopefully I'm being faithful in the locations that God has placed me in, both in the academic setting as well as in the parish. And I am grateful to be with you all. I understand that this is a gathering of the Tony Campolo scholars, and so my understanding is that you're all examining and exploring opportunities of mission, opportunities of moving forward in your particular calls and aspirations with people groups and in cultures that are other than your own. And for that reason, I wanted to share a bit today, briefly, in regards to migration and mission, paradigm shifts in a globalized context. I have served in my pastoral duties at in 4 congregations in my 32 years of ordained ministry, in Brooklyn, New York, where at the end of my tenure, where I was served for 10 years, a congregation that we grew to become a very multicultural, multilingual model of ministry, where the gospel was being proclaimed in Spanish, English, Korean, and in Hindi. 39 countries were represented in the composition of the congregation. We commissioned 2 groups of 50 members to one to Astoria, Queens, and another group in Flushing, Queens, where at this moment they are continuing their service to large migrant communities in those particular areas. As well, currently at this moment, I am serving a congregation in Plainfield, New Jersey, and the composition of that congregation represents 17 countries from Latin America, a family from Korea, and a family from Japan. And so having the opportunity to fully embrace the uniqueness of these cultures, the stories in their midst, right? Making sure that the process of mission is not about solely that they do what we are accustomed to doing, but how we can nurture and how we can establish a ministry that is unique to that setting, because their stories and their sense of spirituality and their aspirations are also honored at the same time. And there are several things that I've learned, right? And first of all, that communities and the globe as a whole is continuing to change. It's just continuous. There are paradigm shifts. If there are models for mission and models for service learning that we create in a year, probably 2 years from then, we would have to reassess, right, these particular realities because of the political, the socioeconomic circumstances that are taking place all over the globe, including in this country. So so what I would like to share at this moment is a little bit about the experience, right, of migration. What does that necessarily mean? And how does that impact even our abilities to aspire to particular fields of ministry? As you all know, peoples have migrated since the dawn of history, but migration has become an intense and often deeply dislocating experience today. And I underwrite that term, dislocating. It's a dislocating experience today. People migrate, especially for economic reasons, but sometimes also for political ones. I know that the individuals in my congregation that have traveled from Honduras and Guatemala and Nicaragua and Colombia, Venezuela, they walk thousands of miles because they are being threatened because of their political views or because of their religious affiliations, even within Christendom itself. What makes migration different today is that travel is relatively quick for the most part and inexpensive compared to previous eras. However, for those who are seeking to enter a land outside legal means, the travel is often arduous and dangerous. The comparative ease of travel means that leaving one's homeland no longer is necessarily a definitive step as it was in earlier times. Thanks to the advances in communications, technologies, many people are able to keep more in touch with and even visit the relatives they have left behind. The apparent realities of this is that during this time of COVID, I know that many of the congregants from my parish, they were unable to travel to their homeland when either a loved one passed away because of this horrific virus. And it made the realities of migration even that much harder. While this may seem to ease some of kind of the stresses of migration because of the communication that they can call each other up or they can FaceTime, etc., it also makes migration an action that more and more people are likely to take up. This is evident in the fact that today, the majority of the world's migrants are women. And these are women who leave their families to earn money to support their families. They work as domestics in sweatshops for making clothes and shoes and at jobs which require skill at assembling delicate items such as the building of computer boards. They often live and work under substandard and even dangerous conditions. They suffer from isolation and loneliness and their separation from their families. Migration is one of the largest social facts of our time, and one of the areas where apostolic witness and ministry is most urgently needed. And I'm aware that some of the realities that we may have experienced, in other words, loved ones or friends or family, have taken up this challenge directly, and many here within this call are as well exploring and examining the issues of migration and mission. But another kind of dislocation, in order for us to gain a greater context, is suffered by those who become displaced persons and refugees. These are people who have, as you know, had to flee their homes because of political conflict. They are unwilling migrants, either within their own countries or to locations abroad. If they are placed in camps as displaced persons or refugees, their freedom is restricted and their day-to-day existence is often tenuous. If they end up in another country, they may have uncertain legal status in their own location. I know that there have been 4 particular instances in my congregation in Plainfield, New Jersey, where I and the elders of the church have had to advocate and go to the detention centers in Newark, New Jersey, to fight for individuals that were abducted illegally, and that were abducted because of the fact that because of the dialect of their tongue or the color of their skin, or because of an assumption made because of the country that they came from. And by the grace of God, we were able to, hard, difficult, we were able to grant them a reprieve from being deported. Individuals that contribute to the life of their communities and their families, and that they are able to as well contribute positively, paying taxes and doing what needs to be done. But these are individuals that need as well support. So along with coping with the strangeness of this new situation, they may be suffering trauma from what they witnessed in their own homelands. A third kind of dislocation connected with people in the move is the trafficking in women and children. Women are lured, abducted, and sold into what amounts to slavery for the sake of prostitution and sexual tourism. Children are abducted from the streets or are even sold by their parents into slavery, either for labor or for sexual exploitation. The labor is often dangerous. The sexual exploitation leaves both women and children vulnerable to diseases, to physical abuse, and even to death. So in the midst of these dislocations, often a horrific nature, are profound challenges which people on the move face. If they come from rural areas and find themselves now in cities, there can be a sense of dislocation in the move from what were largely pre-modern situations of small-scale village communities to the confusing realities of modernity with its individualism and autonomy. In some instances, it is also a confrontation with the postmodern world of rapid communication and social fragmentation. Again, women experience these dislocations. Called in Latin America, living in tiempos mixtos, or mixed times especially. They are responsible on the one hand for holding their families together in the shanty towns which ring the urban centers, and earning money doing domestic labor in the homes of rich or in hotels and office buildings in the center of the city, which predominantly is the characteristic of many of the individuals who are active participants within the life of my parish at this moment in Plainfield, New Jersey. They see the clash between the pre-modern, the modern, and the postmodern in the lives of their children who struggle to carve out their identities amidst competing senses of self, of belonging, and sociality. In other words, what happens is that many of these children and the families wanting to maintain culture and maintain their practices and their norms are having a difficult time with the overwhelming and dominant culture by which they find here in North America. But the coming together of cultures in a single place creates both convergences and dislocations. On the one hand, the coming of cultures together can create new possibilities, and people recognize the specific gifts which newcomers are bringing. The strong sense of family which many immigrant groups have can be a welcome tonic to the fragmentation of families in Europe, in North America, in Australia. Women especially discover a new freedom in such countries beyond the patriarchal restrictions of their homeland. Children growing up find new possibilities even as they struggle with being accepted in the culture of their parents and the dominant culture as they now find themselves. But it's interesting that this dislocation for the newcomer who is not welcomed, for the illegal immigrant, for the refugee, for those exploited for their labor or for sexual use, gives another face to mission and missiology today. The struggles of longtime residents to understand and to welcome the stranger become strained by dealing with so much difference and the social conflicts which inevitably arise. But yet the richness of God's creation and the acute pain of the world come together in the encounter with multicultural living. Therefore, allow me to just briefly at this time, because I understand that I was given at least 2 hours and 30 minutes. No, I'm just playing. Allow me to provide a particular some columns by which one can construct the understanding of mission and service learning today. One, seeing the world through the eyes of God. What does God see in our world today? First of all, the complex character of the human family. Deep down, the human family shares a unity, but it is marked by difference and division. which are not necessarily the same thing. The importance of difference is affirmed in the miracle of Pentecost, where those listening to the disciples each heard them speak in their own language, in their own tongue. And this does not occur out of communication techniques, but out of an affirmation that the word of God can be heard in each human language. This is the basis for the respect for human culture. Moreover, in hearing this message, each in their own tongue, they did not feel separated from one another, but drawn into the same reality of the Spirit. Therefore, God also sees division in the world. Difference becomes a source of division in the world when it is perceived as a threat rather than enrichment. The profound inequalities in our world, especially those caused by the acute poverty from which so much of the world suffers, stand out most starkly. Poverty hampers the growth and development of the human family. The clinging of the rich to their possessions while the poor are kept out of sight, excluded outside the door, is perhaps the greatest sin of our times. And this does not only happen in missions from our global perspective, but it is also occurring within our lifetime in our front yard. But other injustices come into view as well. Discrimination against women, minorities within populations, the exploitations of peoples and of the earth itself, the ravages of war, of disease upon the innocent. Here, the counterpart to the Pentecost story is critical, where we find in Scripture where it says that people of every tribe and tongue, people of every nation will come together around the table. Secondly, the second column in which I wish to share with you today, and then we will have some time for questions, is the heart of God before the world. How does the heart of God respond to this world, arrayed in difference and also deeply divided? That response flows out of God's love and God's mercy. The love of God is expressed, first of all, in having created the world in its multiplicity. This plenitude of creation is a sign of the richness of God's possibilities. It culminates in the incarnation when the second person of the Trinity assumes our lives in all their particularity. The Word becomes flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus did not assume generic humanity, but became part of a culture in a given time and place. And in doing this, he sanctifies all human cultures. Therefore, the incarnation, along with Pentecost, extends God's favor on difference. God also responds to the world in mercy. Friends, as you all, there is much woundedness in this world. And the woundedness of our world is painfully evident. God's mercy is difficult for us to grasp because it so surpasses our own efforts at mercy. It is born out of that infinite love which is in the heart of God. It is a mercy which sees the world as it is, but also sees the world as how it can become. And this is where the scholars come in. This is where the opportunity of whether it's in urban mission, whether it's in global mission, whether it's in prison ministry, friends, this is where the infinite love, which is in the heart of God, becomes a reality. Because we are taught and should be taught to see mercy that sees the world as it is, but also sees the world as it can become. This ever-flowing fount of mercy is also the source of forgiveness about which Jesus testified so eloquently. And it's not that we're taking the posture that wherever we're to go, we are the ones that are to be the forgivers, but that we are to be as well equally receptive to the forgiveness of those in whom we serve. That we are to also realize that wherever we are to go, that God has already been there already, working, manifesting, and that we can see the Christ in the people in whom we're serving, in the people who have experienced the trauma. Just because they are experiencing trauma and dislocations, etc., doesn't mean that they have less mercy and grace imparted upon them. And therefore, we take the posture as well of being learners, not only being doers, but learners of the grace and the mercy that has already been imparted to all of creation. It is that compassion, it is that tenderness which we are called upon to participate in. It is a compassion that indeed suffers with, as the very word means in its root. It is compassion which walks with those who suffer, who are confused and disheartened, like the disciples on the road to Emmaus. It is the tenderness which can see all sides of the dispute in situations of division. It is the tenderness which is a healing touch to broken hearts and disappointed dreams. Therefore, God's perspective, what God sees and what God feels, calls us ever more deeply into presence, the presence of God, so that we can be God's presence in the world. And this is two columns by which we can examine and explore the paradigm, the continuous paradigm shifts that are taking place, both from a global and domestic perspective.